Hello and welcome to a very special split screen review.
Ooh.
Obviously because of the lockdown, we cannot see each other because obviously we don't live in the same house or anything. You know, it's not like it's not like everyone in New Zealand lives in the same house. That would be ridiculous.
There's two houses, and we just happen to be in the other.
With that said, we've got all that
Yes.
shit out of the way.
Indeed.
We can move on to what we're going to be doing. And that is, we're going to be doing a review of Ascension of the Cybermen, which is episode 9 of series 12. But before we get into that, patreon.com/Genesis of Androzani if you'd like to contribute to the channel. We've multiple tiers, such as the Air for My Lungs tier, where you get exclusive access to all kinds of videos, such as full-length reactions to Game of Thrones, which is what we're doing right at the moment. We have the Time Army tier, we get early access to all these videos, and you have the Master tier, where you can request videos for us to do. And then we also have twitter.com/GAndrozani. I recently did, because of the lockdown, I recently did a pinned post on the page where I said something nice about every single story. So go check that out if you want. That being Doctor Who's story, by the way. Yeah.
No, every single story ever written.
Or the TV story. Not Big Finish or novels. But even the ones I haven't seen, I managed to find something nice to say about all of them.
Excellent.
Like, I think for Fort of Doomsday, I just went Google and I went Fort of Doomsday and I found a shot of the Doctor flying in space. And I was like, that looks cool. There you go.
Good as gold.
But yeah, with all those plugs out the way, we have Ascension of the Cybermen. Now, with last week's review, I remember, well, not last week's, but last episode's review, which one of us went first? I think it was me that went first, right?
I thought... No, yes, sorry, it was
Yeah.
you, because I did, yes, I think I
Yes,
did.
I went first because I wanted you to go first this time, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'll follow my old rule. I don't want to betray myself. I actually can't remember why.
All right.
But hey, I made
I
the
think
rules.
he wanted to start with, I think he wanted to lead on the finale, because we'd both seen it by that point.
I think
we'll get
so.
to that.
I can't remember. Anyway, with all that bloody said, you give your initial thoughts on Ascension of the Cybermen.
It's alright. It's hard. It's a hard one for me to really talk about because it did some cool-ish stuff with the Cybermen, but it never really felt like anything fresh or exciting, and it didn't. It was written like it was grand and epic, but it just didn't quite translate that way to me. It felt much more small and intimate, and whether that was intentional, I don't know. But it never really felt epic, and it was okay. I didn't overly dislike it or anything, but it was just an episode where some stuff happened, and the Cybermen were in it, and they had a cool design, and characters had little interactions. The group split off, and there was a cliffhanger. I mean, I'm not hugely energetic either way about it, but it's just because I'm just not. It didn't really inspire me one way or the other.
Yeah, so I was on a panel discussion on Lord Slar's channel, so people know how I feel about this one. I'm kind of along the same lines as you, but possibly a bit more negative.
Yeah.
I don't hate the episode, but I really wasn't a big fan of it. I thought it was bordering on below average. It was quite disappointing for me. I mean,
especially.
I mean, it wasn't like a massive flop, but it was just so. It was Chibnall, wasn't it?
It didn't. Yeah, it was.
This to me felt like.
Really...
I will be completely honest. This episode to me felt a bit like. It was like the Battle of Ranskorav Kolos, but with the Cybermen in it, which makes it a little bit better, but not a lot better.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty much in full agreement there.
Yeah.
Except it had the Brendan stuff, which I
Ah,
found
yes,
really
of course.
interesting.
Though that was
Albeit,
only a few minutes of it though. To be fair.
yeah, it was probably about maybe 6-7 minutes. I didn't time it. But
It's not as bad
terms
as
of stuff I did like.
It's not as bad as the Battle of Ranskov Kolos. I'm not saying that. It just there was a lot of it that reminded me of it though. A lot of it was reminiscent of that finale, but there were little bits and pieces that elevated it a little bit above that level, I think. But I would still say, I think this episode was kind of below average, is what I would say overall.
Yeah, I mean I'm sure we'll get into it individually, but like a lot of the stuff I liked felt quite disconnected. It was kind of patchy and it never really engaged me. Whereas the last episode, I was super absorbed.
Oh yeah,
I was just into it straight away.
And I think
this is great.
That's probably part of the reason why I was quite disappointed by this one, because it was quite a flat follow up to the Haunting of Villa Diodati.
Agreed.
This is also kind of a transitional episode as well. Like not a lot of real importance happens. It sort of just moves the plot from the end of the last one to the start of the next one. And I know there's other episodes that do that, especially in Classic Who, but the difference is with Classic Who, I feel like Classic Who tends to nail it on the head when it comes to characters, exposition, charm, action, fun, whereas this didn't really have any of that. It was just sort of a bog standard episode that meant nothing to me.
Yeah, it was kind of bits of a base under siege, sort of. First, sorry, one big positive, I'm sure we'll mention it in direction, but the opening, the pre-roll scene, the cold open.
Oh, yeah.
Where there was that monologue about evolution or whatever it was, and there was just that Cyberman head floating in space, and then the transition from the eye socket into the titles was really well done. I really
it was
really
that felt like something out of like a Capaldi story.
Yeah.
It was very like
it was kind of
thought-provoking, you know? It was like the beginning of Listen.
No, exactly. It was.
Yeah.
It was kind of like almost like the thesis statement of the episode, because like things like Listen, he sort of says this kind of stuff, or was it Under the Lake that had the bootstrap?
No, before the flood more so. It was part 2, really.
Sorry, I mean, the story, that story, how it had in that story, when he did that bit, it was a whole thesis statement about this is how this whack story is going to work, whereas in this one it never really tied back round to that cold open beyond it just being really cool and just being sort of what we know about the Cybermen already, is that they are sort of inevitable no matter where you go. Which is a great sort of nihilistic horrid concept, but it just I never felt the stakes.
Well, we might as well get into the characters now. So we'll start with the Doctor, and I think I'll start this time. Basically, I remember when I did my discussion, the way I put this with the characters with this episode is there was a lot of clashing between the performances and the writing. And what I mean by that is, for example, with the Doctor, I feel like with the reason why I really like her in The Haunting of Villa Diodati is because she is in a situation that is quite serious, but she's more so, it's more so the fact that she's in control of the situation. You know, with the moral dilemma between, you know, the historical figure dying and living, and the future of the human race. With that, the Doctor, obviously it was a massive decision, but she felt like she was in paramount control of the situation. She was in charge. And I feel like Jodie was really strong there. The reason why I don't think it works in this is because Chibnall's trying to write her as unsettled. He's trying to make her seem like she's not in control, as in she doesn't know what she's doing in the situation. And I don't think Jodie portrays that as well as she does when she's in control, and that's where it lost me for her. I found I found it to be a bit too scattered, and it didn't quite work for me.
I agree, because I really like what Chibnall's, you know, what he's trying to do here in terms of making the character more sort of fallible and vulnerable. However, as you said, in doing so, there's this sort of weird imbalance between how much control she actually has versus how much
because
the master is.
Because in the last episode, she was invoking a very like Tom Baker, David Tennant control, like maybe even John Pertwee sort of controlling, authoritative figure. She was like that in The Haunting of Villa Diodati, whereas in this one, she was becoming a bit more of like a Smith type character, where she sort of became less in control, and it was jarring. It was quite jarring for me.
Yeah, because it sort of tied back into the whole sort of series arc that she's sort of been thrown through a loop with the whole Ruth Doctor and the Master destroying Gallifrey and all that being at the back of her mind. However, I feel in the previous episode, in The Haunting, it was so much more balanced and so much more like she still is in control, but she just has less patience. Whereas in this one, it felt like she was fighting an uphill battle, but not in the way that makes, more higher stakes in terms of, she's at a disadvantage. Because I think, any good story has the protagonist at a disadvantage for most of it. But it just it didn't sit quite right with me personally. So I agree with you there.
Yeah.
Though I do appreciate that there's actually an effort to progress this Doctor and actually have an arc with this Doctor and move her forward.
No, there's certainly a lot more substance to it than there was in Series 11. There's a lot more character there, but I feel that between the episodes, Chibnall hasn't quite found the synergy. It's quite jarring how almost different she is episode to episode. I feel like it's a bit inconsistent, which is a problem. It's upsetting me because each episode, it's a bit. In fact, it almost reminds me a little bit of things we've been talking about when we've been reviewing Series 2 with Jake, and that there's a whole bunch of really interesting ideas that are thrown into the characters, but quite often because the episodes, the way they treat the characters feel so different from each other, it seems like it's not really. Doesn't really feel like one big unit. It feels like a whole bunch of different writers with different takes on the same idea.
And hopefully what we can look forward to is next season she'll have her Series 3 where it all just fits into place delightfully.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you where it's sort of like it's a sort of melting pot and there's less of a synergy in the same idea, the key ideas for each of the characters. Every writer is going to be different, but there is sort of some sharp turns episode to episode in terms of how the writers interpret it.
Mm-hmm. God,
yes, I agree.
It only took Christopher Eccleston half a series to perfect his character. And then he had another half to make it even better. Yeah. Oh, well. Can't expect that of the show all the time.
No.
That was a 1 in a million right there. So Jodie's out of control, and then she has a little space journey with Ryan where she contacts the lone Cybermen, and then they find Kashamas, and then there's the cliffhanger. And not really much really happens, to be honest, with the Doctor.
No.
She's a bit of a non-entity, I would say, in this episode, for me. Oh, and also, the other thing I didn't like was that Chibnall started bringing back all the buzzwords like fam in this one.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else you want to say about the Doctor?
Not really. As you said, it was kind of just getting her from point A to point B, and there was nothing huge. There was nothing in terms of her growth, in terms of notability. It was all quite standard. It was just standard sort of adventure fare. She sort of was in a couple of scrapes, and then she got to the end, and then cliffhanger, as you said.
Yes, basically. Alright then, let's move on to Graham. You go the first.
Alrighty. It was alright. I really don't remember much about Graham in this
Well,
episode.
he
I
had
remember-
a very strange hinted love interest. That was very odd.
Oh yes, yeah.
And there was also one part
That's right.
where he was going to say something, and I think the confirmation is that he was going to say dog's bollocks. But everyone started, because of all the shit that was going on with, like, you know, all the rumors and everything, people were like, wait, did Graham say he was going to say he was the Doctor? People started coming up with theories that
God.
Graham was the Doctor.
Yeah, that's right. Because I remember, because some of his scenes, like for example, the scene with him and Yaz is from the finale, not from this one. So there
I mean, there is that one little bit where she like holds his arm and says something, but I can't even remember what she says.
and that was more of just a precursor
Yeah.
to
So
that
I
sit-down
feel-
scene, which we'll get to later.
I feel like the subplot with Graham and Yaz, not necessarily in terms of their characters, but in terms of the story itself, that's the part that reminds me the most of the Series 11 finale. It was a bunch of technobabble bullshit, sciencey crap, and the only thing I really liked about it was the CGI spaceships and like how they looked, you know, when they were loading into each other. It was quite cool on a visual scale, but all the dialogue was just sciencey exposition that meant nothing. They didn't develop the characters at all. It was bollocks. I didn't like it.
I'm pretty much in agreement. It just it didn't, you know, I wasn't overly invested in this episode, which is surprising considering how much I loved the last episode again.
And the one before that.
And the one before that too, yeah. So we're sort of having a great run, and then with this one, when it had the Cybermen as a sort of the main villains, it felt kind of hollow.
Like, I feel like when they were
sort of,
when they were on the spaceship, I know that they were going through a chase through space, so you can't always slow things down when that's going on. But I feel like there should have been a lot more dialogue in those scenes about the characters and who they are, rather than fucking just saying what they're doing.
yeah, it just felt sort of, oddly balanced, and these new characters, they were nothing really. And I just didn't feel anything towards them, because when that one character died, we'd only seen him on screen for about 15 minutes, so we'd never really got to know the relationship between him and the younger guy.
Yeah.
And
It's funny because I used to complain about like Voyage of the Damned having too much action, but then I watched that recently, and this episode makes Voyage of the Damned look like fucking Family of Blood. Like, in terms of like, Voyage of the Damned has plenty of character writing in it. It's full of it, whereas this is none. The side characters mean nothing. Like, I mean, I know I'm skipping forward, but the side cast in this was so poor. Like, it was just, they didn't mean anything. I don't know their names. I don't know anything about them. I don't know why I should care. I mean, they're the last humans. That's all I know. They are generic cardboard characters, and when they die, I don't care.
And the fact that I suppose we should move on to the Beyond Graham, but who's next on the cast list? Because we'll get to the side characters. Yaz, same deal, really. The performances were all great across the board.
Yeah, so
everything.
So with Yaz, I actually have the opposite feeling to the Doctor, and that I don't like how Chibnall wrote her into such a boring story. But I thought Mandip Gill's acting was actually really strong here, which surprised me quite a lot.
She sort of had the most on-screen maturity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
She sort of felt like the adult in the room.
Yeah, and I think that's
often.
intentional, because I think Chibnall, knowing obviously this coming after Can You Hear Me, she's got a bit of fire under her, you know? She's very positive, she's very like taking leadership, she's sort of realizing who she is, which I wish we got a bit more of in episodes. Like, I wish we got more development of this rather than just in Can You Hear Me in this one. Because it's a shame.
Exactly.
I wish this was like present from the very start of Series 11 to now. I wish it was more integrated, but yeah, I like the performance.
Absolutely. But I also kind of feel like Ryan and Graham would have been better as sort of bit players in this season, only being in about half of the episodes, when we could have had maybe 4, maybe 5 episodes where it was just Yaz and just the Doctor, and we got to really develop her.
This might sound like
You
a
know-
hot take. I think Ryan and Graham should have left after Resolution.
I pretty much agree.
Mm-hmm.
Because in terms of their arc, it was completed. The first Series 11 was so much about them, and their arc came to an end. And obviously, people like having the characters around. The Doctor doesn't have an overt reason to leave them behind or anything, but that can be written. But Yaz obviously has had the most growth this season, but it feels like it should have been.
I just had a light bulb in my head
earlier.
You know how one of the worst things about Spyfall was the companions?
Yeah.
Because they just did a generic Sound of Drums 2.0 with them. What if instead of Graham and Ryan being there, what if it was just Yaz on her own, and then that kick-started the whole thing of her mental health demons, her being isolated in a world, controlled by the Master.
Because you could absolutely sort of play on that both literally and figuratively. Literally being she was abandoned in this sort of subspace area, and then figuratively it's a representation of where her mental state is at, which we then later learn is in a very poor place because she's been struggling with depression for a long time. And through her having not necessarily gotten over it, but having her been through and fighting depression as best she can in whatever way, her becoming a much stronger, grounded human being and being able to be a force for positivity, be a force for good, wanting to become a police officer for the right reasons, for a sense of moral duty to be good to others, to spread positivity, which I think is there's so much to Yaz's character now. I just wish we'd gotten more of it.
Yeah, this feels like a cherry on top of a cake that's half finished. It doesn't quite fit. And then, of course, you mentioned Ryan as well, who was kind of useless. He was kind of useless, honestly.
Yeah, he just didn't get much to do. Obviously, because I want to say there's a lot going on, but there's not. It's just that it's moving at such a breakneck pace, and there's just sort of only specific characters are able to be in specific places and roles in this narrative.
It's so bizarre how this episode can be so fast-paced yet so not interesting at the same time.
And I think a large part of that is to do with how we just don't connect with these companions and these characters. It just doesn't gel with us, and therefore the stakes feel way lower. Whereas, I was watching World War III with my parents earlier today, and that's so much fun.
Oh yeah,
you immediately start with that drama of Rose having been gone for a year.
Fucking love that story. I watched it recently. I love it. It's brilliant.
It's really, really good, and it's fun. It does get very silly, obviously, but it's still really, really fun and so fast paced. And even though it is silly, there are still stakes there, and the character work is so good.
Oh yeah.
Whilst this ridiculous stuff is going on, and this story feels like it kind of lacks that same level of being able to build a world of characters around our usual gang, whilst also having the dynamic of the gang be kind of lacking, I know I'm sort of rambling, but does that make sense?
Oh, I absolutely understand. You're preaching to the choir. I'm a big fan of the Farting Aliens 2-parter. It's miles better than this.
But I was just using that as an example because I was just watching it earlier today. But that's just there's that sort of level of investment for us which isn't there.
And everything that happens at the beginning of Aliens of London with that year passing, it works because of how the first 3 episodes built up to it as well.
Absolutely. There's a lot sort of going on, playing on. So Ryan doesn't have much to do in this episode.
He doesn't have much to do in this series, honestly.
No, because his arc was sort of finished in the first series.
His most featured episode was Orphan 55.
God.
Yeah. But yeah, no, nothing to say about him, honestly.
Nah.
Shall we move on?
Yes, let's do that.
Alright, Ashad, aka the Lone Cyberman.
Bit of a step down from last week.
Yeah.
Purely because he was just a bit more of the sort of ranting, mad.
Well,
megalomaniac.
I was gonna say he in this, like in the last one I really liked him. In Haunting he was fantastic, but in this one he reminded me a bit of Tim Shaw. A little bit. Obviously a bit. Obviously better because he's a lone Cyberman. So there he has that over Tim Shaw. He's not the Tooth Fairy, but the way he was characterized was bordering into that generic villain category, and the dialogue, the way he was speaking, just felt so Tim Shaw to me. You know, it was so.
Yeah.
Oof.
It felt just kind of all this intrigue and the fact that he's a tormented, split soul was kind of lost, and he just sort of became the big sort of monstrous bad guy who is assembling an army, and it just didn't feel nearly as interesting as it was last episode.
Yeah. There was one scene I really liked though, and that was when he infiltrated the base at the start, and then there was those people hiding, and he shot one of them. That was good. The death level was really good. Like the very first sort of section of this episode with the action scenes, there was a lot of carnage. It reminded me a bit of Eirich Saywood. Unfortunately, I didn't really care about the characters, but in terms of the actual carnage itself, it did establish the threat of the Lone Cyberman. It's just unfortunately his actual personality got a downgrade. Big downgrade. Which is a shame.
I agree.
It's a shame because he was the central focus villain-wise of the episode. And I feel like he was wasted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't got much more to say on them, really.
Yeah, there's more I've got to say about things I wish were in this episode, but I can't say them until we get to next review. So I'll leave the rest for later.
I'm 100%. Yep, I'm 100% in the same book.
Yep. And in terms of the Cybermen themselves, so one of the things that's been memed to death is the floating cyber drones. I mean, they were very silly, weren't they?
Yeah, I've seen sillier things in Doctor Who.
Oh yeah, of course.
In terms of it being,
no, I'm not
not
saying it's bad that they're silly. What I'm saying is that the entire setup for the story was that it was this like human race ending event. Like this is, you know, we're coming off the apocalypse. We're coming off the haunting of Villa Diodati. We know what the threat is. This is the apocalypse of the human race. And then these fucking cyber drones fly out, and I was like, okay, all right then. I don't know. There was just something about them that looked really funny.
It was funny. It felt very off with the tone that they were going for.
Yeah. It was almost bordering into that like Nightmare in Silver cartoonish category with the Cybermen.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Sort of like when we first saw the Iron Man Cybermen.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wish they did, because there was a way you could have done the cyber drones but made them a lot more scary. And one of the ways you could have done it is, for example, like, imagine if the heads like landed on top of people and then they started converting them. That would have been awesome.
That'd be cool, and they worked their way down.
Yeah. Also another thing I've heard like about what they should have done in this episode that they didn't was like imagine if there was like an army of like, I don't know, several humans against one Cyberman, and like obviously they were like, okay, there's lots of us, we can take out this one if we focus. But then, you know, the Cyberman takes one human away, and then they're like, oh, where did they go? And then eventually the Cyberman comes back, and then there's two of them. So he's converted one of the humans, and then there's two Cybermen against like 5 humans, and then eventually there's 3 Cybermen and 4 humans, and then there's 3 humans and 4 Cybermen, and then eventually they all become Cybermen. And like the tables turn, and a strong advantage becomes a strong disadvantage over time. That's just something I heard that, again, they could have done, but they didn't, because they'd rather do something, I don't know, if I can talk about the mechanics of a spaceship.
Yeah. I really like the idea of the drones. You know, you could have called them headhunters or something.
Yeah, yeah.
They latch onto someone's skull.
Well, yeah, I had another theory.
But,
Like,
you know-
I had another gruesome theory of like, what if the head landed on their head and ripped off their head? Like that would have been. I mean, that's Big Finish territory, so we wouldn't have gotten away with that. But that's what my mind was thinking. What do you think of the new design of the Cyber Warriors, though?
I love them, but I have a minor quibble.
And what's that?
I don't like the frowny, the sad mouth, the pointed down mouth.
Oh yeah.
I much prefer.
Is that a bit too like on the nose?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the teardrops are you need.
No, but other than that, the new sort of musculature, if you will, the armor plating, the way they move, I love their new aesthetic. It's only a minor quibble about the sad face.
Yeah. This is very much like
I much prefer if it's
in terms of like the design of the actual thing itself. It's almost like a modern version of the '80s Cybermen.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And I love the '80s Cybermen.
Yeah. Although the
so
big difference being between them is the way they're characterized are very different. The new Cybermen are much more robotic than the '80s. The '80s ones are more like characters. You know, they're closer towards having personalities.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one thing that was a big discussion on the Lord Slar one that I did was not necessarily the design, but the actual way the Cybermen were written, because there was absolutely no dialogue. I think, can't remember for sure, but I don't remember there was any dialogue about the Cybermen wanting to convert people at all. Now I know they're in a war, but doesn't it kind of take a little bit away from the Cybermen if you're not going to have them want to convert people? Does that not lessen them a little bit, like in some sense? I mean, there are stories where they haven't done that before, but I feel like there was something missing about the fact that they felt like a bit too, like it could have been any other, you know, hive mind of warrior race aliens that want to kill humans. It could have been this could have been a Dalek story for all we know, and have the exact same script. You know,
it doesn't bother me as much because by this point we know. I can't specifically remember if there is or isn't a reference to it, but we know about the conversion, and I think it's fairly understood that that's what they are, because the survivors, they know because they've been through the war. And I think Yaz, Graham, and Ryan, they figured it out based upon the lone Cyberman. They can just look and see, he was human once.
However, the thing is, because there are other stories that don't focus on the conversion or the horror aspect, they're more on the action aspect of it and the war aspect. Like Earthshock, for example, is more of a war Cyberman story rather than a conversion one. But the difference is, in Earthshock, the Cybermen actually have characters, and that's what makes them. That's what makes the war version of the Cybermen interesting. Is that not necessarily that that their focus is to convert humans, but because they're this killing force, they actually have some personality to them. Whereas I feel like, because even in something like Rise of the Cybermen, they're still converting. And there is something to them, and there's a you know, with John Lumick, there is an actual character behind this force. But with this, I just don't really get the hook behind it, because the lone Cyberman, Ashad, didn't really get that much to do. So what's left? They sort of just became this army of Cybermen without anything extra on top of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there was none of that body horror element to it. It was quite faceless. You're right. I do agree. So I'm sort of like half in one side, half on the other. Half, I don't think it necessarily needed to say what they are. However, on the other side, they didn't do much to present an alternative threat.
Yeah. Yeah.
beyond conversion.
Yeah, because that's what that's something I like about
yeah.
Earthshock and Attack of the Cybermen is they have an alternative character motive,
Yeah.
Whereas this felt more like just a build up to the reveal of the Cybermen, and then we'll talk about the rest when we get to the next episode. But based on something I said just before about Ashad, there is something I wish that happened in this episode that does happen in the next one, but I wish happened here. And it would have been far more interesting than what we got here, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Just in the way the story is structured.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this episode has a lot less going for it than it should. And I feel like there's things in part 2 of this finale story that you could have put in part 1 to sort of better service the 2-part story. If that makes sense.
I fully agree. There's because I have stuff I want to point out as well when we get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to part 2. But yeah, there's things that are missing from part 1, I feel. A lot missing.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we move on to the next part?
Let's do it.
Alright, so we've basically ran through all the ridiculously pointless side cast. The most memorable one is Ravio, because she's the one that was interested in Graham. But even then, she didn't really have that much of a character at all. She had about as much character as bloody Peltraki in the Battle of Ransgrove Kolos.
Yeah.
And
a waste of another good actor. They have so many good
cast
members
how did you...
never...
How did they make Mark Addy boring? How did they
do that to Stephen Fry?
Like, the guy who played Robert Baratheon and Fred Flintstone, they made boring, somehow.
And he was one of the leads in the Full Monty.
Ugh.
Anyway.
Just ridiculous. Chibnall has a talent. Maybe not a good talent, but it's a talent. He does things that are very unlikely.
What's next on the agenda?
Well, we do have another side character, but he's not really a big part of this one. He's more so in part 2, and that's Ko Sharmas, he's played by the same actor who plays Barristan Selmy in Game of Thrones. And I love the actor. His voice is like butter, and he's very magnetic, but he doesn't really have that much of a character. When I saw him...
No, he just sort of shows up.
When I saw him, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if he actually was a Time Lord?
Yeah,
and
I totally thought, because
yeah.
I kind of figured that's where exactly they were heading, was Gallifrey. But I totally expected him to be a Time Lord, or at least a Gallifrey.
And what if he was a Time Lord that was like guarding the portal, Yeah,
I agree. But again, he didn't have too much to do in this episode. He just sort of showed up and was like, surprise, there's a portal, by the way, Master.
Yep. Yeah, there's a few other things he could be as well, but again, part two, so we'll talk about all that stuff. And then, of course, like you said, I think you said your favourite part of the episode was the Brendan stuff, right?
Yes.
Yes, and I think also we have to take into perspective that we are talking about this in retrospect, because at the time we had no idea what it was all about.
So, yeah, I had no idea what it was about, but I was still enjoying it the first time I watched it. Because it was
intriguing, wasn't it?
And Chibnall does that sort of slight mystery kind of English country... Well, not English, this was Ireland, but, that British countryside kind of mystery and the sort of slightly otherworldly element to this kind of grounded
You also
drama.
notice he kind of fan serviced himself by adding a Broadchurch moment into the show, and a pretty important one at that. A pretty fucking important one, because we know we now know what that scene actually is.
He bloody loves them cliffs.
Oh, he does.
Well, I can't say I blame him, because Broadchurch is amazing. Yeah, I really like the way the Brendan stuff unfolded. I got Brendan's character. I like the dynamic between everyone, and the mystery of why has Brendan's father not aged, despite the fact that Brendan looks like he's in his 60s now. and stuff like that. Even though it was completely disconnected from everything else, I was the most excited about the episode.
Yeah.
When it was with Brendan, because I was interested to see where that
Yeah,
went.
and I think obviously we'll get onto the actual meaning in part 2, like what it actually means. But I really like how that was a mask for the truth and how that was executed. I thought it really took me by surprise when I realized that in part 2 what was happening about what we got in part 1. This was actually a very clever, quite unexpected thing from Chibnall that I wouldn't think is the kind of thing he would do, but he did it.
Yeah.
He really took me off guard with that. Like that is not the kind of thing you'd usually get from him. That kind of.
I'm giving the game away a little bit, but I agree. I really liked how in the next episode how it was revealed that this is connected to everything. And what it was. I actually liked that reveal quite a bit.
And also, Chibnall, the fanboy himself. So not only does this kind of do a little nod to the TV movie with the whole idea of the Doctor being half human, but also this is a nod to the human nature, because in Human Nature, John Smith talks about how he's from Gallifrey, right? And Joan Redfern says, "Isn't that in Ireland?" And he said, "Yeah, I suppose it is." And is that, I mean, I don't know if that has any connection, like literally speaking, but is that like is John Smith remembering being the timeless child? Possibly.
It's quite possible.
I don't know.
It's quite possible that you could read it retroactively as that the chameleon arch unlocked something in the Doctor's brain that sort of wires got crossed and it confused his memories.
Well, you got to put in perspective that when you put on a chameleon arch, it like neuters all the memories you have currently, but the memories of him being the timeless child aren't something he has already. So it's like a weird third party in his brain, which would explain why wires are crossed like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of connections to Series 3 in this series. There's a lot. The Jadoon, Captain Jack Harkness,
oh god, yeah, he was
the
there.
Chameleon Arch, Time Lord stuff, the Master. A lot. There's a lot.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. If you count Resolution as part of Series 12, then you got a human Dalek hybrid as well.
That is true.
Yep.
I am a human Dalek.
But yeah, I thought the Brendan stuff was quite intriguing. Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, no, it was about the music. We'll get to that.
Oh yeah, okay. And then of course at the very, very end, at the cliffhanger, the Master appeared.
Yep.
And then obviously that leads into part 2. Or part 3 if you count
The
Haunting as part 1.
It's kind of a utopia situation.
I think, honestly, because some people say that, I think this is more of a like Series 10 situation where it's like Extremis, Pyramid, Live the Land, because all 3 episodes are very separate to me. Even though they technically link, they feel very separate to me.
No, that's actually a fair shout.
Yeah, they shouldn't feel separate. Put that out there, but they do. Whereas I feel like the 3-parter from the Series 3 finale, they all feel like they're one unit. At the very least, part 2 and 3 feel like they're part of one unit. Yeah. Though I would say this story isn't as disconnected as the Series 9 one is, because that one's very disconnected.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other side characters we want to talk about?
Not really.
And I suppose we've already kind of discussed the plot anyway, because... I mean, I suppose we can get into the Cyber Wars. Like, the Cyber Wars is something that's from the extended lore, I believe. I can't exactly remember if it is or not.
They've referenced it. I'm pretty sure in the 5 Doctors they reference it.
Yeah. So it's nice that Chibnall's digging into lore and going into something and like being like, hey, why don't I tell a story about that? But I wish we actually got to see the Cyber Wars rather than rather than what we got.
Just sort of the tail end of it, yeah.
Yeah. Like, at least in, like, something like Day of the Doctor, they actually showed us part of the Time War. Whereas in this, we didn't really get any of the Cyber War. It was a bit, like, almost its last legs. It's a bit... it's a bit strange.
I don't really have much to say, because, as I said earlier, it's just sort of, one small faction, and that's it, and that's all we really get of the whole thing. It doesn't feel grand, even though it sort of should be written as such.
Yeah, it's a bit odd. Of course, it was written by Chris Chibnall, who was very Chris Chibnall.
Yep.
And it's funny because I've rewatched a lot of episodes recently, and upon thinking about it, it's really weird to say this, but my favourite Chris Chibnall episode that he's done for this show, not including Torture because I haven't seen all of that, but just Doctor Who itself, it's still 42.
I think... Oh, I'm probably going to have to go with Haunting last episode.
He didn't write that, though. That was Maxine Alderton. And also, I will say, I'm not counting the ones he co-wrote, like Rosa or Fugitive. I mean the ones that he solely wrote.
Oh, then absolutely 42 for me.
Yeah.
42 I actually think is underrated. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a nice filler episode, and the Russell T Davies parts are great. Which technically, I suppose, breaks that rule of no co-writing, but Russell T didn't put his name on it, so it counts.
Yeah.
Because it's certainly... Because I watched The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, and I really didn't like that when I watched that recently. It's certainly better than Dinosaurs on a Spaceship and The Power of Three, and The Ghost Monument, and Arachnids in the UK, and The Saranga Conundrum, and The Battle of Roly-Poly Fuck Off. I mean, the only ones that I feel like even come close to it are probably Woman Who Fell to Earth, Resolution, and Spyfall. And maybe... I don't know, maybe this finale story? I don't really know. It's hard to say. Can't really talk about part 2 yet anyway. I rewatched 42.
I rewatched 42. I might be completely ambivalent towards it. I do not know. Who knows? I may not have even seen the finale.
We may not even watch it.
Who knows?
But yeah, I rewatched 42 lately, and... Yeah. It's a good story.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's more enjoyable than all the other ones that he solo wrote. That's just me.
I think I'm pretty much...
I mean, the Power of Three could have been better if it wasn't for that stupid ending. But yeah, Series 3 is great.
It is.
It's like the weakest episode from Series 3 as well, and it's still really good.
Yeah, absolutely, because the Lazarus Experiment is also underrated.
Yes, as is Daleks in Manhattan / Evolution of Daleks, as is the Shakespeare Code. As is Last of the Time Lords.
Absolutely. You can't see it on your end, but the DVD, it's just out of frame, but it's above my head there on my shelf.
Yeah. The Runaway Brides are good as well.
It's great.
Yeah. And everything else that I haven't mentioned is absolutely phenomenal.
Cool.
Anyway.
What's next?
The direction was by Jamie Magnus Stone. I can't remember if he did episode 1 or 2. He did one of those ones. He either did Spyfall Part 1 or Part 2.
I think it was
Can't
Part
exactly
2.
remember. Yeah, if he did Part 2, then I think he may have done Orphan 55 as well, but I can't remember exactly. But yeah, Jamie Magnus Stone was the director, and I thought it was visually... the CGI was really good. And it looked expensive.
Yeah.
But... And the Cybermen shots, like with the mass production of Cybermen, that was quite cool. I like that. But
it didn't lend itself. There was nothing sort of particularly in the script. There was nothing that let it be a particularly developed episode in terms of letting the director have, a stamp of a specific style or giving it, a bit of.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's part of the problem with Chibnall episodes, though, is because they don't really have much style. It's hard to put a stamp on them.
Yeah, because as we just said, I mean, you just compare it to the last 2 episodes, which were dripping with style.
Oh yeah, oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
And Nikola Tesla as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And bits and pieces of Spyfall as well, even for that matter.
Yeah, Spyfall, to give it some credit, does have some quite nice film noir. But I think that's more on the director rather than Chibnall. I don't think Chibnall really intended that. It just happened because the director was very talented.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought Jamie Maidstone did fine. I thought he did a good job. It definitely lived up to its sort of high budget BBC show thing that it had going for it. But I wouldn't say it stood out in terms of creative style or anything. I have a lot more to say about the direction next week, let's just say that.
Yes, agreed.
The direction next week is a lot more interesting to talk about. There's a lot more style. Probably, oh, actually no, I'm wrong. I was going to say the most visually interesting Chibnall episode, but no, that's still 42 because Graham Harper.
That shot of Martha in the pod.
Oh, where there's no sound?
Save you.
Brilliant. Music by Sagan Akinola, and the one thing that people have most talked about when this came out was the new Cybermen theme.
Yes, I liked it.
It was a big drum beat. It was like
very steel. It sounded very heavy. It didn't sound like heavy metal, but it sounded like clanking and clunking and mechanical, which is perfect for the Cybermen. Yeah.
I like, I think I mentioned this in the Haunting review, but I like that each era the Cybermen get like a new theme. Like every time there's a new composer.
Absolutely.
I really like that. Though to be fair though, the Cybermen music in the 70s with Revenge isn't very good. Because I think it's Kerry Blyton who does that one, and Kerry Blyton's music is very divisive. It's quite high-pitched. But apart from that, the 60s, 80s, RTD, and Sagan Cybermen themes, fantastic.
Agreed.
And other music, I can't really remember, to be honest.
No, I only really remember the Cybermen theme.
Yeah. It was intense, I'll say that. Alright, if we've got nothing else to say about the writing, direction, or music, I suppose we can move to the next point.
Yeah, I'm ready to move out.
Right, well that would be the viewership, which was 3.7 overnight and 4.9 overall. Which I think, if I remember correctly, I think it's slightly up from Haunting. Yeah. Which is good, because it shows that Haunting worked.
Yeah, people were hooked after Haunting. People wanted the next one.
Yeah, and they're telling other people that Haunting was good, maybe the next one will be the same. And then, yeah, what happened, and people had their opinions on it. I think Callum, interestingly, his reaction to this was interesting, because when he watched this episode, it was his favourite of the series.
Oh.
Which is a very peculiar, interesting opinion, but fair dues, I suppose. I don't really have anything to counteract that with necessarily, because I don't hate it. I don't hate this episode.
I just feel neither strongly neither way, you know? Yeah.
I mean, it might be a case of less is more, I don't know.
Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah. It's not his favourite anymore, that's changed. Because he did his ranking. And his recap and ranking video was almost a complete copy and paste of our ones, like in terms of the format.
Well,
he had.
I mean, if it works, it works. I mean, I'm not.
I mean, what did Moffat say? You got to steal from the best.
I mean, you man. That's on you. I mean, that's nothing to do with me. I'm not taking.
Anyway. I'm flattered
Praise
that Callum
blame,
thought that
don't come to me.
I'm flattered that Callum thought our structure of video was ideal to copy and paste. Let's just say that. Anyway, give your conclusion and a rating out of 10 for Ascension of the Cybermen.
It was okay. It was sort of... There was some moments that I really liked, like the Brendan stuff. I really liked the design of the new Cybermen, minus my one little nitpick. This new Cybermen theme was really cool. And yeah, it was alright. I just don't have much to say. So for me, it was just a 5.5 out of 10, which was, you know, it's okay. It's okay. I just sort of nothing did, really. It didn't do much for me.
Wow. I didn't expect this necessarily, but I'm going to snap with you. Because my score is also a 5.5 out of 10.
Huzzah.
Which is a very... It's different for you, but for me, 5.5 is a very awkward number. I think the only time I've actually given it, like, on screen to anything else on this channel is I think I gave Venom a 5.5. Because I was like, I don't know what to do with this film.
Neither did the filmmakers,
I just don't know.
I don't think.
I was like, I don't know what I feel about this. Like, I just don't really... It's a bit awkward. And 5.5 is a very awkward number. There are films that I would give a 5.5 to if you ask me now, but at the time I didn't. But the only one that I have given on screen was a 5.5 to, I believe was Venom. But I'm giving a 5.5 to this. And yeah, I think it's slightly below average. The dialogue and the exposition and all the techie sciencey stuff just didn't interest me at all. I wish there was more character building. The Cybermen were quite generic. I like the design, but the writing around them could have been way better. Ashad got pushed to the background. The Doctor felt a little bit misjudged. Amanda Kill's performance was good, but I wish that her character had gotten more development beyond just the really touching stuff from Can You Hear Me. I wish there was way more, like especially in Series 11. Graham and Ryan didn't really mean anything, and this was very much just a transition episode between Haunting and the finale, and I feel like it wasted its time, and like it really wasted some potential to do something special with Part 1 to lead into Part 2, and I personally think that Chibnall made the wrong decision to structure the story the way he did in this episode, the way he chose to do it. That being said, though, the one thing he did get right in terms of the structure was the Brendan scenes. So I will give him that. But it's still a 5.5. I would say in terms of the meat of the episode, it's like a 5 out of 10. But the Brendan scenes bump it up to a 5.5.
Agreed. I'm pretty much... Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah. So yeah. Not keen. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up this video?
See you on the next one. No, nothing really. Oh, stay safe. Wash your hands. Stay.
Oh yes, wash your hands. Stay clean. Inside. Yep. Social distance. Look after your family.
Look after yourself. Be good.
And if your grandparents know how to use technology, then give them a call. I'm sure they're panicking like hell right now because they're the ones that are being targeted, and they need love. We all need love. Yeah, so look after each other.
It's a tough time for a lot of people, and we're pretty lucky here. We've got it. I mean, our government has been pretty good about it, but just take care of each other.
Yes, and one thing that we're doing at the moment to really help you guys all out whilst you're in isolation is we're uploading quite a lot of videos at the moment because I've got unlimited free time basically at the moment. Most of them will be Game of Thrones because me and Callum are pretty much available all the time. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of Game of Thrones content, but yeah, I just thought it would be a good idea to just upload a bit more content for you guys to consume whilst you're in this long period of isolation while you might need some entertainment and to escape and take your mind away from the bleakness of the reality of Earth. But we can get through this.
Absolutely.
There's been worse. We're not being sent to war. We're not being sentenced to die. We're being sentenced to live. We're being enforced to look after ourselves. So
yeah.
Don't do what the Ninth Doctor says. Just sit inside, eat chips, and watch telly.
Yep.
Although don't eat chips if it comes from a takeaway store because those will be closed. But you know what I mean. Buy some potatoes at the supermarket, but don't panic buy either. Leave some for some other people. I don't know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. I'm rambling about coronavirus.
Distance.
And it's horrible.
Distance. Be kind. Empathy. Wash your hands.
Just be kind.
Exactly. Listen to Capaldi.
You know, Clara, you would have never had to deal with a fucking hybrid if you just wash your bloody hands. Oh, have you seen that clip from The Thick of It where he's like, okay, it's a fucking isolation.
Yes.
Don't touch any phones. You put down your phone. Oh, I love Peter Capaldi.
Brilliant.
I as no disrespect to Jodie, but I miss Capaldi as the Doctor.
Same.
Series 10 was delight.
It was.
Anyway, with all that shit said, we'll see you next time for The Timeless Children.